I'm 32, and my favorite sound is the quiet in my apartment at 5:30 a.m. before the city wakes up and before my work calendar starts pinging like a slot machine. I run a small software company that makes boring but reliable tools for small e-commerce shops. Inventory syncing, automated return labels, reconciliation reports that don't make you want to cry. We're lean, 12 people, remote, profitable for the last 3 years. I pay myself a modest salary because it still amuses me to live below my means. My toothbrush sits at a right angle on the sink. The plants aren't dying. The fridge is organized. It's simple, and it's mine. That clarity didn't come for free. I grew up being told there was a ledger with my name on it. Not figuratively, though the figurative one was worse, but an actual binder Mom called the family budget. Blue vinyl, D-rings, labels made with one of those clicky embossers. Inside, tabs for utilities, groceries, gas, and then a handwritten section in red pen. Child expenses. She would flip to that page like a teacher calling attendance. Milk, she'd say, tapping the page. $2.50 a gallon. You boys just inhale it. Do you know what that costs? I was 7. My brother was 4. We nodded because nodding made things end faster. Dad was subtler, in a way that made it feel like a test I was always failing. Do you like this roof? He'd ask if I left the light on in the bathroom. You like hot water? Funny thing, it's not free. Maybe you should think about that when you're daydreaming. That was his word for any moment I wasn't actively doing something useful, daydreaming. I remember squeezing shampoo into my palm and calculating, because that was the point. You were supposed to learn to count, just not on the kind of fingers that mattered to them. Time, care, safety. Only dollars. At 8, I learned the phrase, "You owe us." It came out of Mom like a formula, as precise as multiplication tables. She said it when I wanted a book at the school fair. Library is free. You owe us for raising you. When I asked to go to a birthday party at a skating rink, skates aren't free. You owe us for food. When I outgrew my sneakers and my toes pushed against the rubber like little ghosts, Walmart shoes are cheaper. You owe us for the roof over your head. Dad had a favorite too. Food, shelter, education. That's thousands of dollars. You'll understand when you're older. You'll pay it back. At home, love was a vending machine. Insert exact change. Chores done with the right face. Grades with the right humility. Gratitude spoken not as thanks, but as penance. And something might drop. Kick the machine wrong, and you'd get the lecture, the ledger, the sigh that carried a world inside it. Burden. When I was 9, I brought home a flyer for a science club. It met after school on Wednesdays. It cost $10 for materials. I needed my parents to sign. Mom held the paper between 2 fingers like it was greasy. $10 for what? Batteries, I said. And wires. Do you have batteries? Do you have wires? They have a kit. She laughed without mirth. We have kits here. It's called a kitchen. You can stir batter. There's your science. She handed the flyer back. You boys think money grows on trees. It grows on your father's back and mine. You'll pay us back one day. Mark my words. Dad didn't look up from the couch. We're not paying so he can play with batteries. When he's paying us back, then he can decide how to waste money. I didn't go to science club. I went home and learned to read the budget binder without getting caught. The columns were neat, the decimals lined up like soldiers. There were notes in the margins. B's lunch account refilled, $15. Field trip, $6. Next to each, in smaller writing, add to total. The total kept moving. I imagined it chasing me like a shadow. By 11, I could predict which days would be tally days. They often followed good days, because balance had to be restored, or unexpected expenses. If the water bill spiked, there would be a monologue about baths are not an every-night luxury. If I left a cereal box open and the loops got stale, there would be a sermon about throwing money away. If I lingered in the cereal aisle and looked at the brand with a cartoon tiger, Mom would squeeze my arm just above the elbow and whisper, "Don't you dare reach. You haven't paid us a single dime." I learned to make myself small in grocery stores. Hands clasped, eyes on the industrial tiles. The floor smelled like disinfectant and oranges. The free sample ladies, with their toothpicks and paper cups, looked like smugglers of some contraband joy. At 13, I found an envelope in Dad's desk labeled college savings. Inside, $47 and a folded note in Dad's cramped writing. This is a start. You will be responsible for the rest. It will be good for you. You will appreciate it more when you've earned it. When I asked him about it, he smiled like he'd caught me cheating. Good, he said, tapping the envelope. You're looking at real numbers. This is reality. None of this follow your dreams nonsense. Dreams don't pay electric. Mom added from the kitchen. Also, remember to repay us first. College is on you. We did our job already. Their job, in their telling, was a billable service. In mine, it was air. But I stopped arguing with air. I started washing dishes harder, not because I thought it would help, but because it ate minutes. Every plate scrubbed was a minute of not sitting at the table while Mom itemized my existence. The quiet I love now is a direct descendant of the quiet I learned to cultivate then. Careful footsteps, soft drawers, the psychic disappearing act of a kid who doesn't want to make the meter run. There were small rebellions. At 14, I took a paper route. The manager handed me a reflective vest and a smile that said, "We both know this is illegal, but mornings are dark and cash is cash." I biked 5 miles before school and folded the money into a hollowed-out copy of a Hardy Boys book, because that seemed appropriate. When Mom found the cash, she held it up like a game show model. "So you do have money," she said, triumphant. "We'll take $30 for your share of groceries this month, and $10 toward the water bill. You take long showers. Don't look at me like that. You want to be a grown-up? Pay like one." Dad chimed in. "This is good training. You don't want to be a leech your whole life." I didn't argue. I mentally added a new column in my own invisible ledger, emotional interest. It compounded daily. High school was a grind where the assignment was not learn, but perform gratitude. If I got an A, Mom would say, "Good, that's what you owe us." If I got a B, Dad would sigh and say, "Not getting my money's worth this semester." Report card nights were auctions. Who's bidding on pride? Mom would joke to Dad, and they'd laugh. And I would laugh too, because sometimes the safest thing to do is join the laugh that eats you. One winter, the furnace went out for 2 days. We layered up, hats indoors, soup steaming like a small mercy. Mom made a show of putting 2 extra blankets on my bed. "See what we do for you," she said, tucking them in too tight. "You'll remember this when you're paying us back." "I will," I said, and realized the sentence sounded like a promise, not a threat. It surprised me. I started collecting. Not just slips and prices, but words, routines, the exact cadence of "you owe us." I copied the numbers from the budget binder into a little notebook I kept under the loose attic floorboard. Milk, $2. 50, shoes, $14. 99, yearbook, $25. Lunch account, $15. Gas to drive me to the dentist, $3. 12. My handwriting got smaller as the pages filled. I imagined the day the columns would balance. Debit, credit, 0. At 15, I turned down track because the bus to meets cost money. The coach put a hand on my shoulder. "You're fast," he said. "You could be very fast." I said I liked running alone better. It wasn't a lie. I ran before dawn so no one would see me wanting something. At 16, Dad started calling Saturday mornings rent checks. He'd lean against my doorframe while I was tying my sneakers. "What's it going to be, son? Yard work? Wash the cars? Or you can pay cash?" It sounded like choice, and in that way was worse than an order. I picked yard work because grass doesn't talk back. I mowed a lot. The hum of the mower covered 1,000 thoughts. The only time I saw any real softness was when Mom was very tired after a double shift at the pharmacy. She'd sit at the kitchen table with her shoes off and her feet swollen, and I would rub them, because that was the one thing that changed the script. For a few minutes the ledger fell silent. "Thank you," she'd murmur, eyes closed. "You're a good boy. Do I still owe you?" I wanted to ask. Instead I asked if she wanted tea. She nodded. The kettle clicked like a metronome. I watched the blue vinyl binder resting on the counter, half open, a dog asleep with one eye still tracking. I know some people reading this will ask the question that haunted me for years. Why didn't you leave? And the boring answer is that leaving costs money. And I was taught the price of every mile, every slice of bread, every lamp's wattage. The more honest answer is that I didn't yet know there was a world where love wasn't rented by the hour. I thought every family kept a tab. I thought every "I love you" had a receipt stapled to it, total circled, balance due. On my 17th birthday, there was a cake with my name misspelled and a single card. Inside, Dad had written, "1 year closer to paying us back." Mom drew a smiley face next to it. I smiled too, because habit is a kind of gravity. I cut the cake and served them first. My slice tasted like flour and something metallic. That night, I lay awake and quietly moved numbers in my head, the way people rearrange furniture without getting out of bed. Here's the part that matters for later. I believed them. Not in the cosmic sense, not in a way that made me think parenting should be invoiced, but in the practical sense. They were going to make the debt real whether it was or not. So I decided something I never said out loud. I would pay. I would pay exactly. I would pay until they couldn't say the sentence anymore. Then I would stop returning calls. That's the seed. That's the honest beginning. I didn't start as a superhero of boundaries or a sage of therapy. I started as a kid who liked clean columns, who learned that numbers can be both a prison and a key. And I started paying attention to every dime, every sigh, every you owe us, adding them up in a ledger only I could see, even while theirs sat heavy on the counter like a prophecy. I moved out 2 weeks after graduation. There wasn't a dramatic fight, no police, no scene with neighbors peeking through curtains. It was a Wednesday afternoon. The air felt heavy, like the house was trying to keep me in with humidity. I had 3 boxes from the grocery store that still smelled like apples, a duffel bag, and a bike missing its rear reflector. I paused in the kitchen to look at the blue binder one last time. Mom had left it open to utilities. A post-it stuck out. July high. Watch showers. As if fear could lower a water meter. You're really going to be ungrateful, Dad said from the doorway, arms crossed. He had the kind of posture that made every sentence into a verdict. I'm going to be gone, I said. That's all. Mom held a dish towel like a flag she hadn't decided to wave or burn. We fed you. We clothed you. We did everything for you. And this is how you say thank you? Thank you, I said, because it seemed important that those words exist somewhere between us as proof. I'll pay you back. That's right, Dad said, the corner of his mouth lifting like victory. You will. He held the door, but it didn't feel gentlemanly. It felt like he was keeping count of how much air conditioning escaped while I lugged my life across the threshold. I balanced a box on my hip, and the binder's tabs flashed in my peripheral vision like road signs. Gas. Groceries. Child expenses. Add to total. My first place was a studio above a nail salon that smelled like acetone no matter how wide I opened the single window. Rent was $475, cash, to a landlord who kept his records on a legal pad dusted with cigar ash. The mattress I bought off Craigslist looked clean in the afternoon and haunted at night. I shoved it against the far wall and pretended it was deliberate. More floor space to stretch, I told myself. The job that stuck took me not because I was good, but because I was early. I'd applied to everything. Dishwasher, night stock, custodian, cashier, and the first manager who said, "Can you start now?" Wore a visor and a name tag that said Terry. It was at a chain sandwich place where the bread arrived frozen and the tomatoes tasted like water. I learned to mop with my whole body. I learned to stack cheese like it was Jenga. I learned that people will hold eye contact while asking, "Is avocado extra?" and then be offended by the answer as if it were a moral failing. Minimum wage plus tips that depended on the luck of smiles. In the mornings, I went to the community college that was too beige to have a mascot you could remember. I filled out FAFSA with a woman named Alma who had her coffee in a thermos that said, "World's okayest mom." "Do your parents contribute?" she asked, fingers hovering over keys. I laughed without humor. "No." She nodded like she'd heard that laugh before. "Then you'll qualify for a Pell. We'll do subsidized loans first, better interest. Sign here, and here, and here." The pen had a tiny chain like it needed to be anchored to something so it didn't float off and become a kite. I took an intro to programming class partly because it fit my schedule and partly because the professor, Dr. Klein, had a syllabus that made my heart slow down. Lists, clear expectations, points breakdowns like recipes. We started with Python, printing hello, world, like we were all waving at the same ocean. The first time I made a loop do what it was supposed to do, I felt the exact opposite of debt. It wasn't free. Nothing is, not tuition or books or the laptop I bought used and prayed would boot, but it was fair. You fed the machine logic. It gave you a pattern. No size. No guilt. Just output. I thought leaving would be a clean cut, but anyone who has ever tried to walk away from a story someone else is writing knows they keep narrating from a distance. The calls started immediately. Mom at weird hours, Dad on speaker, their voices doing the duet they'd perfected. "Hey, big man," Dad would say. "How's the bachelor life? Expensive, huh? Bet you appreciate all we did for you now." Mom chimed in. "We were going through the budget and realized we forgot to add your orthodontist. That was what, $3,000? We saved your smile." "We'll be reasonable," Dad said. "50 a week to start. Consider it interest only." I stared at my phone in the glow of the single lamp I'd rescued from a curb. 50 a week was my groceries. 50 a week was bus fare and a bag of rice and the laundry machine that ate quarters like Pac-Man. 50 a week was the difference between sleeping and lying awake with a calculator in my head. "I can't right now," I said. "I'm paying rent, tuition, books." "You think we didn't?" Mom's voice sharpened the edges of the room. "You think money fell from the sky then and got stingy now? You owe us, and now you're running up a new tab with the government like that's better." "We could have bought a new car with what you cost," Dad said. "We drove that beater for you." The beater had been Dad's choice. I swallowed what I wanted to say. I learned to keep my mouth spring-loaded but closed. "I'll send what I can," I said, which felt like breaking a rule I'd written for myself, but also like a pressure valve. I sent $25 the next Friday. It was muscle meat instead of ramen. It was one less bus transfer, which meant walking in heat that made my shirt cling. I sent another $25 2 weeks later, and when I skipped a week because my hours got cut, Mom texted, "Wow, after all we did." I called back and got her voicemail, which said, "Leave your name and number and why you're taking up my time." I was tired all the time in a way that felt like a posture, something you learned to hold so it wouldn't slip and show your insides. My schedule was a Jenga tower I tried not to breathe on. 5 a.m. Run, cheap, quiet, same lane I'd always loved, shower at the gym because water was free there, class from 8 to noon, shift from 1 to 9, homework in a corner booth while the closers counted the till and complained, bus home at 10:15, bed early enough to try again. The money I didn't pay them sat in a separate savings account I nicknamed Exit. I put $10 there even when $10 hurt. On paper it looked like nothing. In my head it was a seed. I kept records of my records. A spreadsheet with sheets within sheets like a Russian doll. Tuition, books, used, highlighted in fluorescent ink by ghosts, rent, utilities, bus pass, food, unexpected, like the time my bike chain snapped and I jogged 3 miles in the rain to make it to my shift on time. And then, because I couldn't stop myself, an ongoing estimate of what my parents had spent on me from 0 to 18. I used averages from government reports, receipts I'd copied, the blue binder numbers I'd smuggled out memory by memory. I didn't know then that the spreadsheet would become a blueprint. Back then, it was more like a charm you keep in a pocket. If I could see the total, maybe it could stop being fog. I met people who bent the light of my world a little. Dr. Klein, who wrote marginalia in my code that wasn't criticism but curiosity. A coworker named Sheila who always took the worst shifts because she had 2 kids and a court date she never talked about, and once slipped me a Tupperware of spaghetti with a muttered, "You look like you're losing." A librarian named Marcus who kept sliding me printouts of open-source documentation and saying, "You like rules. These are good rules." I didn't date, not really. I watched couples mock argue about whether to get chips with their sandwich and wanted to want that. But I didn't trust wanting. Wanting felt like a hole in a boat. I patched and bailed and told myself the ocean could wait. Dad left a voicemail in October that started with, "Your mother is crying," and continued with, "We added up those doctor visits when you had that ear thing. Remember that? We took time off work. We sat in waiting rooms. That has value. We're not unreasonable. We can do a payment plan." He said payment plan the way other dads said, "Proud of you." I called back from a bench with peeling paint and a view of the bus depot. "I remember," I said. "I remember I couldn't hear out of the right ear for a week." "You remember being cared for," Mom said. "Don't be ungrateful and forget. We're only asking for 100 this month. For old time's sake." 100. I could feel the number slot into my week. I could feel which things it would erase. I stared at the timetable where buses came and went with military indifference. "I can do 50, I said. 50. Dad repeated like I'd told a joke without a punchline. "Not even worth the transfer fee. Think like an adult." The call ended with soft insults, a paradox they were good at, bleeding you with a whisper. I sat a while longer and imagined a future where my phone was a quiet blue rectangle that did not carry their voices. I put the phone back in my pocket and went to my shift. What saved me wasn't a big break, but a series of small ones that stacked. Dr. Klein needed a lab monitor and said, "It pays 12 an hour. You seem like you respect quiet." Respect felt like the right word. I took it. The hours were steady, and between answering questions about syntax and restarting frozen machines, I studied. I built a tool that scraped textbook prices and emailed me when used copies dropped below $20. I sold the tool to 3 classmates for $5 each, and the feeling was less about $5 and more about cause and effect. Mom sent a text on Thanksgiving morning. "We miss you at the table. Turkey is expensive this year. Funny how you only show up when it's free." I put on my uniform and worked a double. I made 6 sandwiches for a guy who said, "I'm feeding the guys at the shop. We're open too," and overtipped with guilt. At 8 p.m., I went home, set a plate with a toasted roll, some deli turkey, a packet of mustard, and ate it slowly. Each bite counted. Not punishment. Accounting. On New Year's, I ran 5 miles in rain that cleaned the city a little. When I got home, I opened the spreadsheet and created a new sheet, Yearly Expectations. In it, I listed the classes I needed to graduate, the jobs I could apply for with those classes, the starting salaries those jobs offer according to the job board that felt like a bulletin for another planet. I made columns: before taxes, after taxes, rent, savings, exit. I put debt, theirs, as a category with a blank number next to it. I promised myself that if I ever filled it, it would be with precision, not shame. The calls didn't stop, but they changed pitch. Less, "You owe us," and more, "When you start paying us back for real, we can finally relax." It was management speak in a family kitchen. A few times, I didn't answer. The world didn't end. The sky didn't fall. The blue binder didn't sprout legs and walk into my studio to remind me that my shower ran 8 minutes yesterday. One night, late, I opened my notebook and wrote a sentence without decoration: "I will graduate." It looked like graffiti in my own head. Then I wrote, "I will be good at something that pays money." Then, smaller, "I will end the ledger." I put the pen down. The room smelled like nail polish and ambition. The city outside was loud, but somewhere underneath the honking and the siren and the muffled bass of someone's party, I could hear a quieter sound building, like the early parts of a song you can tell will eventually swell. It wasn't happiness. Not yet. But it was forward. Graduating from community college didn't feel cinematic. No cap toss into the air, no family clapping from the bleachers. I walked across a stage in a gymnasium that smelled like varnished floors and stale popcorn. The dean shook my hand, handed me a folder with nothing in it yet, and said, "Congratulations." My name was mispronounced, and when I sat back down, the only sound I heard was my own heartbeat in my ears. But when I walked outside into the May sunlight, holding that empty folder like a ticket stub, I felt taller. Not because anyone was watching. It seemed important that no one was. But because I knew this was the first thing I'd earned that couldn't be itemized against me. I didn't invite my parents. The phone rang that morning anyway. Mom's voice was sweetened like tea with too much sugar. "So, today's the big day," she said. "Yeah," I said, keeping it flat. "We were just saying, it's funny you're celebrating something we paid for." Dad chimed in from the background. "That's right. You should be shaking our hands today." I said nothing. Silence has a way of multiplying. They filled it. "Don't forget loans count as debt too," Mom added. "First you pay us, then Uncle Sam. That's how it works." I hung up. My hand trembled, but steadied by the second. I walked the 3 miles to my shift and let the rhythm of my feet flatten their voices. After graduation, I transferred to a state university. It was bigger, noisier, full of people who carried themselves like they belonged in the world by default. I still felt like a trespasser, sneaking in through the side door, but I didn't mind. Trespassers get to observe. I lived in a crumbling off-campus apartment with 2 other guys who treated ramen as a food group and the smoke alarm as background noise. I claimed a corner of the living room, hung a curtain to mark my space, and built a desk out of a door balanced on cinder blocks. It was ugly and heavy and perfect. Money was still knife-thin. I worked nights in the campus IT help desk, teaching freshmen how to reset passwords and gently suggesting they not spill soda on loaner laptops. During slow hours, I coded small projects, a budgeting tool for students, a roommate chore scheduler, a silly app that predicted your mood based on weather and class schedule. Nothing flashy, but each line of code felt like stacking bricks. My parents kept calling. Every Sunday like clockwork. I stopped answering, but the voicemail stacked up. We were calculating your prom expenses. That tux rental wasn't cheap. We added up what braces cost again. Don't think we forgot. You're in college because of us. You owe us double now. Sometimes Mom would text pictures of bills from the binder, like evidence in a trial I hadn't agreed to. See this? Groceries 2002. You think milk was free back then? I used to get angry, then exhausted, then finally detached. Their words became like radio static. Present, but not commanding. What mattered was the spreadsheet I kept refining. I got meticulous. Government data gave me the average yearly cost of raising a child. I adjusted for inflation, subtracted for the years we had hand-me-downs, added back in when I remembered specific receipts. I went line by line, sometimes at 3 a.m., with cold coffee. Rent, food, clothes, utilities, medical. Their numbers and mine didn't always match, but my goal wasn't generosity or stinginess. It was accuracy. Accuracy was the revenge. I gave the file a plain name. Budget. XLSX. If anyone opened it, they'd think it was homework. But to me, it was scripture. Every cell I filled in made me feel less like a debtor and more like an accountant preparing a final audit. My second year at university, I landed an internship at a mid-sized software firm downtown. The kind of office with free coffee, air conditioning that hummed like money, and chairs that adjusted 14 different ways. I walked in on the first day in a thrift store dress shirt, clutching a second-hand laptop bag. Everyone else looked polished, like they were born knowing the unwritten rules. But the thing about being raised on ledgers is that you know how to read patterns. I noticed who stayed late, who took notes, who actually pushed code versus who only talked about it. I kept my head down, delivered small fixes fast, asked questions only after trying twice. By the third week, my supervisor stopped double-checking my work. By the sixth, he was forwarding me requests like I already belonged. The first paycheck stunned me. Not the amount. It was modest, but the feeling. Direct deposit. No hands outstretched. No size. Just numbers in my account, untouched by guilt. I stared at the screen in the library and nearly laughed. I sent $50 to my parents that Friday, almost out of reflex. Their reply, "That's it." That was the last time I sent money. There's a saying that success is the best revenge. I don't fully agree. Success is neutral, it just is. The real revenge is control. Being able to choose where each dollar goes, who gets access to your time, who doesn't. That realization hardened in me like concrete. I lived frugally. While classmates leased cars with Bluetooth everything, I rode the bus with headphones that only worked in one ear. While others went on spring break trips, I worked double shifts. My apartment walls were thin enough to hear arguments and bad saxophone practice, but they were mine. And when Mom texted, "We know you're making money now," I ignored it. I let silence do the talking. One night in my senior year, I dreamed about the binder. In the dream, I was holding it, flipping to child expenses. But instead of red ink, each line had my handwriting. Next to milk, $2.50 was paid. Next to shoes, $14.99 was paid. Line after line, a stamp of closure. I woke up with my pulse steady, not racing. It wasn't just a dream, it was a plan crystallizing. I graduated again, this time with a degree in computer science, and a job offer that felt unreal, $72,000 starting salary at the same firm where I interned. The recruiter smiled and said, "We're excited to have you." I smiled back, but inside I was laughing at the absurdity. My parents used to tell me I'd never make enough to pay them back. They were right, in a way. I was going to make more. That summer, I moved into a one-bedroom apartment with actual walls, no curtains as doors. I bought furniture new, from a store, not a curb. I let myself have one luxury, a coffee maker that ground beans fresh. Every morning when it whirred, it felt like proof that I was no longer living on borrowed time. The call still came. "When are you going to settle your debt? We're older now, we need help. Remember, without us you'd be nothing." But now, their words didn't sting, they echoed. Echoes fade. Instead of deleting their messages, I saved them. A digital drawer of reminders. Not because I needed them to hurt me anymore, but because they were evidence of the story I was rewriting. And late at night, I opened my spreadsheet. I refined the totals again, factoring in inflation with a precision that would have made Dad proud if he'd ever cared about fairness instead of leverage. The number solidified. One final total. Not an estimate. Not a guess. An invoice for my childhood. And I promised myself, one day, they would get exactly that number. Not a penny less, not a penny more. Then nothing. The first 2 years of my career felt like a long exhale I didn't realize I'd been holding. I showed up early, stayed late, took notes in every meeting, and volunteered for the projects no one else wanted. My supervisors noticed. Promotions came faster than I expected. Raises followed. I went from fixing small bugs to managing entire product launches. The money multiplied. Not overnight, not like magic, but steadily, like water filling a glass until it was brimming. With each paycheck, I split the deposit into 3 accounts: living, savings, and what I called the ledger. Living covered rent, utilities, food. Savings was untouchable. The ledger was different. It was where I fed the plan. Every month, I transferred a slice of my earnings into it. Like feeding a fire I wasn't ready to light yet. I told no one. My coworkers thought I was just frugal. Friends assumed I was saving for a down payment, or maybe grad school. Even girlfriends. Yes, I finally allowed myself to date. Never knew why I sometimes stared a little too long at a bank app before putting my phone away. The calls from my parents never stopped. If anything, they escalated. They'd leave voicemails about needing their share of my success. "Your mother saw your LinkedIn," Dad said once. "We know what you're making. Don't pretend you can't afford us now." Mom added, "Remember braces? That was $3,000 at least, plus gas money to all those appointments. We should be seeing at least $500 a month from you. That's fair." They said fair, the way normal parents said love. At first, I let the voicemails play out before deleting them. Then I stopped listening entirely. I just watched the little red notification pop up, swipe left, and hit delete. Silence was the only language that felt right. Still, I kept refining the spreadsheet. Nights and weekends I combed through old government data, consumer price indexes, healthcare averages. I factored in every receipt I could remember, every number I'd copied from the binder years ago, adjusted for inflation. I broke things down by year. Year 1, diapers, formula, pediatric checkups. Year 5, clothes, elementary school supplies, field trips. Year 10, orthodontist visits, school lunch accounts, gas to soccer practice. Year 15, shoes, braces adjustments, utilities, groceries. Every line had a note, a memory, an echo of a fight or guilt trip attached. The total grew more precise. Eventually, it wasn't just a rough calculation, it was an audit. And when I looked at that final number, I didn't feel anger. I felt clarity. That was the exact weight they'd hung around my neck for 18 years. I wasn't going to run from it anymore. I was going to lift it, set it down in their lap, and walk away. Around 28, I got another promotion and equity in the company. By 30, I was earning more in a year than both of my parents had ever earned combined. I don't say that to brag. It still felt surreal. But it gave me the one thing I'd never had before: control. Control over my schedule. Control over my money. Control over my silence. One evening, after a 12-hour day that ended with me debugging code while eating cold takeout, I sat on my balcony and finally said the words out loud. "It's time." My voice startled me. It had been a long time since I'd heard it say something with certainty. I spent the next month finalizing the plan. I wasn't sloppy. I wasn't going to throw money at them and let them twist it into another story about how I was still in their debt. No, I was going to settle it like an accountant closing books. I opened a new account with no ties to my main bank. I set up a single transfer option to their account, which I'd memorized years ago after writing them a check for groceries in high school. I cross-referenced the routing and account numbers 3 times to be sure. I drafted the message that would accompany the transfer. Just 4 words. Debt repaid. We're done. That was it. No apologies. No explanations. No back and forth they could twist. Just a clean line under 18 years of red ink. Every night that month, I rehearsed what it would feel like. The email confirmation ping. The idea of their faces reading those words. Dad's jaw clenching. Mom's eyes darting like she was looking for a loophole. I imagined the silence that would follow once I blocked them everywhere. It wasn't fantasy. It was closure, sharpened to a point. The night before I executed the plan, I pulled the old notebook from my attic box, the one where I'd scribbled down the binder numbers as a teenager. The paper was yellowed, The ink faded, but my small, cramped handwriting stared back at me. Milk, $2. 50, shoes, $14.99, lunch account, $15, gas to dentist, $3. 12. I flipped to the last page. My 16-year-old self had written in capital letters, "I will pay." I touched the words with my thumb and whispered, "You did." For the first time in decades, I slept without grinding my teeth. The next morning, I made coffee in the expensive machine I'd once sworn was my only luxury. The beans ground fresh, the smell filling my apartment. I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, and logged into the bank account. My hands didn't shake. I entered the number, the exact total I had calculated over years of work. I double-checked it, then triple-checked. I attached the note. Debt repaid. We're done. Then I clicked submit. The screen refreshed. Confirmation. Funds transferred. I stared at it for a long minute, not because I doubted, but because I wanted to remember every detail. The way the cursor blinked, the font of the confirmation message, the calm hum of the coffee maker still on the counter. Then I did the final step. I blocked both of their numbers. I blocked their emails. I blocked them on social media. It took less than 5 minutes to erase decades of noise. When it was done, the silence was unlike anything I'd ever known. Not heavy silence, not fearful silence, but pure, clean quiet. I leaned back in my chair, took a sip of coffee, and smiled. Not a triumphant smile, not gloating, just a small, steady smile that said, "It's over." I hadn't bought freedom. I hadn't bribed them into leaving me alone. I'd given them exactly what they demanded. No more, no less. And now they had nothing left to hold over me. When the transfer went through, I expected fireworks inside me, some sudden burst of adrenaline, or maybe a shaky laugh. Instead, I felt still, the way a lake looks when the wind finally stops. I didn't check my phone for hours. I went about my day, answered emails, reviewed code, jumped on 2 Zoom calls, ordered lunch. Life moved forward like nothing monumental had happened. That was the strangest part. It didn't feel like a war had ended. It felt like the air pressure had normalized. That night, curiosity won. I checked my voicemail, half expecting a storm. There were 2 new messages. The first was Dad's voice, clipped and angry. "What the hell is this? You think you can just send money, and that's it? You think this settles it? You ungrateful little." He cut off, maybe realizing rage didn't play well on recordings. The second was Mom, quieter, almost whiny. "After everything, all the years, you send us that cold note? Debt repaid? What about love? What about family? You think you can wash your hands of us like some bill? Shame on you. Shame." I hit delete on both. My thumb didn't hesitate. The next week was the quietest of my life. No more calls at dinner. No guilt-laced texts pinging during meetings. No Facebook notifications with snide comments under my photos. For the first time since childhood, I wasn't living inside someone else's invoice. At work, my team noticed something. "You seem lighter," one of them said on a call. "Like you slept good for the first time in forever." "I did," I said simply. And I meant it. My dreams stopped being crowded. No more reruns of binder pages or kitchen lectures. Instead, I dreamed of mundane things, walking down streets, folding laundry, coding loops that worked on the first try. Peaceful dreams. Of course, they tried to break the silence. People like my parents don't let go easily. 2 weeks after the transfer, I got a letter in the mail. The handwriting was Mom's, looping and aggressive. It read, "Money doesn't erase family. You think you can put a price tag on us? You're sick. You're still our son. That means forever. You can't block blood." There was no return address, but I recognized the postmark from my hometown. I read it once. Then I fed it through my shredder, the blades chewing it into confetti. Watching those words become paper strips felt better than reading them ever could. I wish I could say I never thought about them again, but that would be a lie. Years of conditioning doesn't vanish with one wire transfer. I'd still catch myself hesitating before buying something nice, hearing Mom's voice say, "Must be nice to waste money when you owe us." I'd still hear Dad sigh when I left a light on, as if I'd committed a crime against the electric bill. But now, when those voices rose, I answered them. I'd say out loud, "Debt repaid." Sometimes softly, sometimes sharp. Always final. 3 months later, I ran into an old neighbor from my childhood at a grocery store downtown. She was surprised to see me. "Your parents said you were doing big things," she said, tossing a bag of apples into her cart. They said that. I asked, skeptical. Oh yeah? Bragging all the time. But they also said you're distant. They act like you owe them visits. I almost laughed, but stopped myself. I settled what I owed. I said, maybe more to myself than to her. She gave me a puzzled look, but nodded anyway. We parted ways, and I realized something important. They were probably still spinning their story. They'd probably never admit to anyone that their son had cut them off. They'd twist it into something that made them victims. And that was fine. I wasn't in their story anymore. With the noise gone, my life expanded in ways I hadn't expected. I started running again, not just as stress relief, but for joy. I signed up for a half marathon. Training miles replaced tally sheets. I joined a book club. I started cooking real meals instead of surviving on takeout. I even let myself buy the good olive oil without guilt. Small luxuries became symbols of freedom. Dating became easier, too. For years I'd kept people at arm's length, afraid of the ledger lurking behind me. But now, when I sat across from someone at dinner, I didn't feel like a fraud. I wasn't carrying an invisible debt anymore. I could just be. One night, while reorganizing files on my computer, I stumbled on Budget. XLSX, the spreadsheet that had ruled my life for over a decade. I opened it and scrolled through the endless rows of expenses. Milk, shoes, gas, braces, field trips. Each number was precise, polished, perfected. At the bottom, bolded in black, was the total, the exact figure I'd sent them. I stared at it for a long time. Then, without ceremony, I deleted the file. The confirmation box popped up. Are you sure you want to move this file to the trash? Yes, I whispered, clicking. It was gone. I didn't realize until later that deleting the spreadsheet was the true act of freedom. Sending the money closed their ledger. Deleting the file closed mine. Because in the end, love isn't a transaction. Parenting isn't an invoice. I never owed them a dime. But they demanded payment. So I gave it. Precisely. And now, with both ledgers wiped clean, I was free to write my life without numbers hanging over every word. The silence hasn't changed. It's steady, calm, unbroken. Sometimes people ask if I regret cutting them off. If I ever feel lonely without family, I tell them the truth. I don't regret it. Not for a second. Because I learned something my parents never understood. Sometimes the best closure is giving people exactly what they demanded. Nothing more, nothing less. And then walking away forever. The funny thing about closure is that it doesn't announce itself with trumpets. There's no cinematic swell of music, no slow clap from the universe. It just sits with you, quietly. 6 months after the transfer, my life had settled into a rhythm that felt unfamiliar but good. I woke up in a bed I'd chosen, in a home with furniture I'd paid for, and every object around me was just that, an object, not an item on someone else's tally sheet. The first real test of my freedom came one afternoon when my phone lit up with a number I didn't recognize. Normally, I screen everything, but I answered without thinking. Hello. There was a pause, then a voice I knew instantly. My father. Changed your number, huh? He said, not asking but accusing. We had to track you down through your work email. My pulse quickened, but not from fear. More like irritation, the kind you feel when a mosquito buzzes in your ear. What do you want? I asked flatly. You think money buys you out of family? He snapped. We raised you. You can't erase that with a wire transfer. You asked me to pay you back? I said calmly. I did. The ledger is closed. He scoffed. Ledger? You think family is math? You think you can wash your hands of us like some bill collector? Yes, I said. Exactly like that. The silence that followed was thick, almost sticky. Then Mom's voice chimed in on speaker. Son, listen, you've misunderstood. That money was just the start. Parenting isn't just dollars. It's sacrifices, it's love, it's years. You can't put a price on that. I almost laughed. You're right. You can't. But you tried. For 18 years, you tried. And you told me I'd never be free until I paid you back. Well, I did. So we're done. Ungrateful, Dad muttered. I hung up before he could build momentum. My hands didn't shake this time. I blocked the new number. That was the last time I ever heard their voices. After that, something shifted in me. It was like living in a house where a leaky faucet drips for years, and one day it just stops. You don't realize how much noise you've been tolerating until the silence feels strange. I filled that silence intentionally. I started a Saturday ritual, coffee, a run, and then wandering a bookstore until something caught my eye. It was indulgent in the best way. Nobody asking what it cost. Nobody demanding gratitude for letting me buy it. Just me, choosing. I traveled, too. The first trip I booked was embarrassingly modest. 3 days in Seattle, just because I'd never seen the Pacific Ocean. I stood on a rocky shore with the wind whipping at me, and for the first time in my life, I didn't hear the phantom phrase "you owe us" echoing in my head. The ocean didn't ask for anything. It just existed, and so did I. Meanwhile, work blossomed. I poured energy into projects and watched them succeed. I built tools that people actually wanted to use, and the revenue grew. By 31, I wasn't just comfortable. I was wealthy in a way I'd once thought was reserved for other people. I upgraded to a condo with floor-to-ceiling windows and bought furniture that matched. But I didn't buy it to prove anything. That was the difference. The success wasn't about them anymore. It was about me, finally building without debt as the foundation. Sometimes, though, I'd wonder what they told people back home. I imagine Mom at church, shaking her head and sighing. Our son is so distant. We gave him everything, and this is how he treats us. I pictured Dad bragging about my salary while complaining I never visited. And I realized, let them. Let them spin whatever story makes them feel less small. Their narrative isn't my responsibility anymore. One evening, I got an email from a distant cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. Hey, your parents say you cut them off. They're saying you won't help even though they're struggling. Is that true? I sat with it for a while. Then I typed back. Yes, it's true. I settled what I owed them, exactly as they always demanded. After that, I chose peace. I wish them no harm, but I'm not part of their lives anymore. The cousin never replied. I closed my laptop and made dinner. It felt good not to defend myself, not to over-explain. Just the truth, simple and complete. Deleting the spreadsheet had been symbolic, but I realized I'd built another kind of record in its place. Not numbers, but experiences. First solo vacation. First piece of art I bought because I liked it, not because it was cheap. First night, I left all the lights on just because I could, walking from room to room with brightness spilling everywhere. There was no binder anymore. No tabs, no red ink. Just a life measured not in debt, but in moments. Therapy helped, too. I started seeing a counselor after a coworker casually mentioned it. At first I resisted. Therapy felt like admitting weakness, and weakness was something my parents used as leverage. But the therapist, a calm woman named Ruth, didn't treat me like a case to solve. She listened. She said things like, "That sounds heavy," and "You survived a transactional form of love. That leaves scars." Scars? I asked once. Scars don't disappear, she said. But they stop hurting when you touch them. They just remind you of where you've been. I carried that with me. By 32, I could say, without irony, that I was happy, not in a fireworks and champagne way, but in a steady, everyday way. My plants were alive. My fridge had groceries I actually wanted. My mornings were quiet, my nights were mine. Sometimes, when I thought about the binder, I pictured it gathering dust in a kitchen drawer, the ink fading. Maybe Mom still opened it now and then, pretending the numbers meant something. Maybe Dad still added new charges in the margins, convinced I'd one day come crawling back. Let them. I had already paid the bill, and I had already walked away. The most liberating thought of all came late one night as I was reading by lamplight. I realized that I no longer felt the need for revenge. The transfer, the note, the blocking, that had been for them. Necessary, sharp, final. But the life I was living now, that was for me. And that was the part they'd never get to tally. The real triumph wasn't the payment. It was the silence that followed. And the fact that I filled it with laughter, with friendships, with small rituals, with a future entirely of my choosing. The ledger was closed. The book was mine to write. Here's a weird twist I didn't expect. I'm the villain in their story, and I'm okay with that. I used to flinch at the word ungrateful. It was the sharpest tool in their kit. Now I can hold it in my palm and look at it in the light. Ungrateful for transactional love? For a childhood run like a balance sheet? If that's the label, it fits like a glove I don't mind wearing. A year after the transfer, I drove through my hometown for the first time in forever. Not for them. My storage unit near campus needed clearing before the owner auctioned off my old printer and a box of mismatched mugs. I took the long way on purpose. The streets felt smaller. The grocery store had been remodeled into the kind of place that sells artisanal pickles. I parked outside the old house and didn't get out. The roof Dad worshipped looked the same. The maple tree I used to stare into from my window had grown over the sidewalk like it was trying to apologize for shade it didn't give back then. The blinds were down. I couldn't tell if they were home. Part of me wanted to knock. Not to reconcile. To see if the binder was still there, blue and heavy, sitting on the counter like a judge. Instead, I sat with the car idling and let the engine hum drown out 1,000 tiny ghosts. Then I put the car in drive and kept going. Not dramatic. Not heroic. Just movement. At the storage unit, I opened a box marked college papers and found the cheap notebook where I'd written "We will pay." I smiled at my old arrogance. Plural, like I had a chorus backing me up. I kept the notebook. Everything else went to recycling. On the way back, I stopped at the public library. It smelled the same as every library I've loved. Dust, paper, a kind of polite hope. A bulletin board near the entrance had flyers for chess club and story time, and this hit me hard. An after-school science club. Batteries, wires, $10. I stood there long enough for the librarian to clear her throat gently. "Librarian for Can I Help You?" "I want to cover those," I said, pointing. "All of them. The kids who can't pay." She blinked. "Oh, we have a small fund." "Make it not small," I said, and my voice trembled for the first time in a long while. "Make it so none of them have to ask." She took my name, my card, my address. "Do you want a plaque? Or a note? People sometimes." "No plaque," I said. "No name. I paused. Just add a line on your forms that says covered." When I got back in the car, I put both hands on the wheel and laughed a little. "Okay, kid," I told the 14-year-old who didn't get to touch the wires. "You get your batteries." At home, I built a different kind of spreadsheet. Not debt, funding. Quiet little lines that said things like lunch balance clearances, field trip pool, team fees, test fee waivers, science kits. I called a guidance office at my old high school and asked what went unfunded. The secretary said, without missing a beat, AP test fees. Yearbooks for seniors who want them but can't swing it. Cleats. I said, "Send me totals," and she did, and I paid. Not because I wanted credit. Because I know what it feels like to be told a want has interest due. I also started something I wish I'd had. Small no-essay microgrants for community college students in my city. $200 here, $300 there. Numbers that don't impress donors but change a week, a month. I called it the Batteries and Wires Fund. It made me laugh every time I typed it. The application asked exactly one question. What would this cover that feels embarrassing to ask for? Kids wrote about bus passes, toolkits, scrubs, exam fees, the gas to get to class. I sent money. Sometimes they sent a thank you. Sometimes they didn't. Either way, the ledger in my head that used to hiss the word owing learned a new word, enough. This is the part where someone expects I'll cave when life gets sharp. Like the universe will test my resolve with an emergency, and I'll run home, because that's how these stories bend. The closest I came was a certified letter from a hospital 2 towns over. My heart did the thing it does when it remembers old drills. Inside was a request for emergency contact information for your mother, admitted last week. No personal details. No plea. Just a blank form and a line that said family contact. I sat with it. My therapist's voice in my head. "You can decline without being cruel." I called the number. "I'm not a contact," I said. "I'm not family in the way you mean it." The nurse thanked me, matter of fact. I hung up and went for a run until my legs burned and the river looked like it was breathing. When I got back, I made tea and stared at the ceiling and understood that compassion and contact are not synonyms. I wished her well, privately, like a prayer you don't post. Then I went to bed. A month later, a distant cousin posted pictures from my parents' anniversary party. A rented hall, a sheet cake, a banner that said 35 years. My father in a suit that didn't fit. My mother in a dress the color of toothpaste. Caption: "Family is everything." I felt nothing. Not ice. Not heat. Just a quiet absence where panic used to live. I closed the app and watered my plants. I sometimes get messages from people who are halfway between where I was and where I am. How did you do it? How do you know it's the right choice? The truth is you don't. You only know what it costs to stay. You measure the price of every phone call, every sigh, every weaponized memory, and at some point the math stops arguing with you. You step out of a currency that was never fair. Work kept growing. The little team I mentioned at the top of this post, 12 now, remote, sane, became my favorite kind of family, the chosen kind. We have a rule: no heroics. Number 2 a.m. Saves, no martyrdom, no ledger of who owes who for what. We write things down. We pay people well. We take time off and mean it. When someone messes up, we fix the thing, not the blame. They tease me because I color-code our projects with an aggression I refuse to unpack in therapy. I tell them it's because I enjoy tidy columns. Everyone laughs. Nobody weaponizes it. I fell in love quietly. Her name is Jess. We met because our dogs decided to be friends at the park, which is as good a reason as any to talk to a stranger. On our third date, she said, "I don't want kids," and something unclenched in me. "Me neither," I said, and when she asked why, I told her the truth without making it a horror show. "I didn't have parents," I said. "I had creditors." She winced, nodded, reached for my hand. We've been together a year. Sometimes we leave every light on. Sometimes we eat cereal for dinner and watch bad documentaries. Sometimes we lie in the dark and talk about names we'll never use. It all feels like the opposite of owing. There's one more scene I need to put here, if only to complete the circle. Last month, I ran my first marathon. At mile 22, the world started tilting like a pinball machine. A volunteer clapped and shouted, "You got this." This is the hard part. I thought about 17-year-old me sitting on a bed too tight with extra blankets, promising he would pay. I thought about the binder. I thought about the note I sent with the transfer, debt repaid. We're done. Then I thought about the second ledger, the one I built out of science kits and bus passes and spaghetti in Tupperware. I thought, this is the part where you get to keep going even when nobody is cheering. I crossed the finish line to the sound of shoes on pavement and strangers ringing cowbells. Someone put a foil blanket around my shoulders like I'd just come back from space. I took a banana, laughed at how good a banana can taste when you've earned it, and sat on the curb with my head in my hands, not to cry, but to breathe. When I got home, Jess had taped a piece of paper to the fridge. It said, "What we owe. Rent, paid. Electric, paid. Ourselves, ongoing." Below that she'd drawn a little box and written balance. Enough. I kept the paper. I like looking at it. It's the only ledger that ever made sense. If you've read this far, you probably want a moral. I don't have one. I'm not preaching. I'm not telling you to do what I did. I'm just handing you the numbers and the snapshots and the sentences that got me here. The core is simple. Love isn't a transaction. Parenting isn't a billable service. If someone insists it is, if they turn your life into an invoice and your gratitude into interest, sometimes the best closure is to give them exactly what they demanded. No more, no less. And then walk away with your pockets empty and your hands finally free. I still wake up at 5:30 to quiet. I still make coffee in the machine I love too much. I still line my toothbrush at a right angle because it delights the version of me who needed control to feel safe. I run. I code boring, reliable tools. I answer to nobody who keeps a red pen ready. The ledger is closed. The book is mine. And page by page, I'm writing a life that doesn't require a receipt. TLDR, my parents treated raising me like a debt, kept a running tally, and used it to control me. I calculated the total and wire transferred the exact amount with a note. Debt repaid. Then I blocked them. I didn't buy love. I bought silence. I paid forward to kids who need batteries and bus passes. I'm 32, self-made, peaceful, and done. Sometimes the cleanest ending is giving people precisely what they demanded and nothing more.